She wasn't supposed to survive the night. Not out here, not in a storm that swallowed sound and memory alike. But somehow she was still watching. The wind howled across the Colorado highlands like something alive, dragging sheets of snow sideways through the dark, erasing tire tracks as quickly as they formed, burying anything that dared to stand still. And beneath that endless white chaos, a shape lay half-hidden near the edge of a frozen roadside ditch, unmoving, nearly indistinguishable from the drift forming over it, except for the eyes, amber and faintly reflecting the distant sweep of headlights cutting through the storm. Ethan Walker didn't plan to stop. Not tonight. Not after 3 hours of driving with no destination. Just the dull hum of the engine and the quieter, heavier noise in his chest that refused to fade, but something in the corner of his vision caught. A flicker, a presence that didn't belong to the storm, and his hands tightened on the wheel before he even realized he had slowed down. The truck rolled another 20 feet, tires crunching over packed ice, then stopped. For a moment, he just sat there, engine idling, wipers struggling against the weight of snow, staring through the windshield as if the shape might disappear if he looked too long. Because sometimes it was easier, sometimes not seeing meant not remembering, but the eyes were still there, steady, unblinking, not pleading, not panicked, just aware. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, already reaching for his coat. The cold hit him like a wall when he stepped out, sharp and immediate, biting through fabric, crawling under skin, the kind of cold that didn't just freeze your body, it slowed your thoughts, made everything heavier, quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. He moved carefully, boots sinking into uneven snow, wind tugging at his jacket, his breath visible in short bursts as he approached, and with each step the shape became clearer. A German shepherd, female, her coat stiff with ice, fur matted along her sides, ribs faintly outlined beneath the frozen layers. But it wasn't the condition that made him stop a few feet away. It was the posture. The way her head rested low, but her eyes tracked him, precise, deliberate, as if she had been waiting, not for anyone, but for someone specific. "Hey, easy," Ethan said, voice low, steady. The way he used to speak on missions when everything depended on tone alone, and the dog didn't flinch, didn't try to move, just held his gaze, something quiet and unspoken passing between them in the storm. He knelt slowly, the snow soaking into his jeans, and reached out a gloved hand, hesitating just before contact because up close he could see it, the collar thick, worn leather, partially hidden beneath frozen fur, and along its edge, barely visible under a thin crust of ice, something darker, something that didn't belong to the storm at all. The dog's breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, but there just barely, a thin rise, a fragile thread of life refusing to break, and Ethan swallowed hard, the memory he'd been outrunning pressing in at the edges of his mind, the same helpless stillness, the same silence before everything went wrong. "You're not done yet," he whispered, more to himself than to her, and as his hand finally touched her side, he felt it, faint but real, a warmth beneath the cold, a heartbeat fighting through the storm, and the dog's eyes softened, just slightly, as if acknowledging something neither of them had the words to name, while far off in the distance, thunder rolled low across the mountains, and for a brief second, the storm didn't feel like weather anymore. It felt like a warning. The storm did not ease, it deepened, as if the mountain itself had decided to close in around them, wind pressing harder against Ethan's back while he worked, forcing his fingers to move faster than the cold would allow, because cold like this did not wait. It crept, it settled, it took its time until time itself no longer mattered. He slipped one arm beneath the dog's chest and another under her hind legs, careful, steady, expecting resistance or fear, but she did not fight him, did not even flinch, her body light in a way that spoke of too many missed meals and too many miles. Yet there was something else beneath that weight, something coiled, something controlled, like strength held in reserve rather than lost. "I have got you," he said quietly, lifting her against his chest, and for the first time her head moved, just slightly, her muzzle pressing faintly into the fabric of his jacket, as if recognizing warmth, or perhaps something more familiar. Then warmth. The walk back to the truck felt longer than before, each step heavier, snow climbing over his boots, wind pushing sideways, but he did not rush because rushing meant falling, and falling meant losing her, and for reasons he could not explain, that was not an option his mind would accept. He opened the passenger door with a shoulder and eased her inside, laying her across the seat, brushing snow from her coat with gloved hands that had gone stiff from the cold, then quickly pulled off his jacket and draped it over her, tucking it around her sides as best he could. The engine hummed louder when he climbed back in, heat beginning to push through the vents in uneven bursts, filling the cab with that faint metallic scent of old air systems working too hard. And for a moment, neither of them moved, the storm raging just beyond the glass, the world outside reduced to white noise and shadow. Ethan glanced over, watching her closely, counting the rise and fall of her chest. Slow, shallow, but there, still there. And then something shifted. Not her body, not her breathing, but her eyes. They flicked just once toward the dashboard, toward the radio, which crackled faintly with static before catching a distant signal, a clipped voice buried under interference, the kind of transmission you only heard in certain places on certain frequencies. The dog's ears twitched. It was small, almost nothing, but it was not random. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her now, not as something he had found, but as something that had found him, and that thought settled deeper than it should have. "You hear that?" he asked, the question leaving his mouth before he could stop it, and the dog's gaze returned to him, steady again, aware in a way that did not match the condition of her body. The heater kicked harder, warm air finally beginning to thaw the edges of the cold, and with it came a faint drip, water melting from her fur onto the seat, revealing more of the collar beneath, the leather dark and worn, edges cracked from time, but built solid, not the kind you bought at a roadside store, not the kind left on a stray. He reached out slowly, brushing aside a layer of damp fur, and this time when his fingers touched the collar, he felt it clearly, a subtle ridge along the inside, too precise to be damaged, too deliberate to be accidental. Ethan's hand paused there, resting against the cold leather, his brow tightening as something in his memory stirred. A training detail, a design choice, something used for a purpose he had not thought about in years, and outside. The wind howled louder, rattling the truck just enough to break the moment, but not enough to shake the feeling now settling in his chest, that this was not a coincidence, that storms did not just deliver things like this without reason. And as he looked back at the dog, her eyes still fixed on him, unblinking, patient, it felt less like he had rescued her, and more like he had just stepped into something he did not yet understand. The road disappeared behind him as Ethan eased the truck forward again, tires struggling for grip beneath a growing layer of packed snow, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the storm while everything beyond it dissolved in a shifting white and shadow. And for a while he drove without speaking, without thinking, just listening to the uneven rhythm of the engine and the quieter, more fragile rhythm beside him, counting each breath the dog took as if the number itself could keep her. Here, the heater was finally beginning to win its slow battle, warming the cab inch by inch, and with it came more movement, subtle at first, a faint twitch along her flank, a deeper pull of air into her lungs, and then, almost imperceptibly, her front paw shifted against the seat, not random, not reflex, but controlled, intentional, like someone testing the weight of their own body after a long time without it. Ethan noticed immediately. He always noticed. "Easy," he murmured, glancing over, his voice low and steady, the same tone he had used years ago when calm was the only thing standing between order and chaos, and the dog's eyes found him again, clearer now, more focused, the fog of the cold beginning to lift from them, revealing something sharper beneath, something trained. Another crackle came from the radio, louder this time, the signal stabilizing just enough for fragments of words to slip through, coordinates, call signs, clipped phrases that did not belong to civilian channels, and the dog reacted again, her ears lifting higher, her head shifting. A fraction toward the sound, despite the obvious strain it caused her. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "That is not normal," he said under his breath, not as a question, not even as a statement, but as recognition. He reached over and lowered the volume, testing it, watching her response, and when the sound faded, so did the tension in her posture, just a little, just enough to confirm what he already suspected. He exhaled slowly, a thin stream of breath clouding the air in front of him before being swallowed by the heat. "You're not just some stray, are you?" The words hung there, unanswered but not denied. Snow slammed against the windshield in a sudden gust, forcing him to focus back on the road. But his mind had already shifted, pieces moving into place, old training rising to the surface, details he had not needed in years now demanding attention. The collar, the ridge, the reaction to radio frequencies. None of it fit the story of a dog left to die in a storm. None of it fit coincidence. A mile ahead, barely visible through the storm, the faint outline of his cabin emerged between the trees, a dark shape against darker pines, and relief flickered briefly in his chest, not because he was safe, but because he would have time, space, a place to understand what he had just picked up off the side of the road. As the truck turned onto the narrow path leading up to it, the tires crunching over ice and gravel buried beneath snow, the dog shifted again, this time more noticeably, her head lifting a few inches before settling back down, her gaze drifting not toward the cabin, but past it, toward the tree line beyond, as if something out there still held her attention. Ethan followed her line of sight for a second, seeing nothing but storm and shadow, yet feeling the weight of it anyway, that quiet pull of something unfinished. He parked the truck and cut the engine, and for a moment, everything went still, the sudden silence inside the cab almost louder than the storm outside, and in that silence, he could hear it clearly now, her breathing stronger, steadier, alive in a way she had not been before, and as he reached for the door, preparing to carry her inside, a thought settled. Deep in his chest, unwelcome but undeniable, that whatever this was, it had not started tonight, and it was not going to end with a simple rescue. The door creaked under the weight of ice as Ethan forced it open with his shoulder, wind rushing past him into the cabin like it had been waiting for an invitation, swirling snow across the wooden floor before he managed to push it shut again with a heavy thud, sealing them inside a space that felt warmer, not because it was, but because it held stillness, and stillness was something the storm could not touch. He did not waste time. He carried her straight to the old wool rug near the fireplace, lowering her carefully, one hand supporting her head until it rested gently against the fabric, and for a second he stayed there, crouched beside her, just listening, counting again, breath in, breath out, stronger now, not by much, but enough to matter. "Stay with me," he said quietly, the words almost lost in the crackle of dry wood as he quickly moved to light the fire, hands working out of habit, stacking logs, striking the match, coaxing flame into life until warmth began to spread in slow, uneven waves across the room. The light shifted everything. What had been shadow in the truck was now detail. The ice along her fur softened, droplets forming and sliding down onto the rug, revealing the true color beneath. A deep sable coat, strong lines, muscles still present under the weakness, and that collar again, clearer now, darker than it should have been in certain places, not just worn, but marked by something time had not erased. Ethan returned to her side with a blanket, draping it over her body and tucking it around her legs, then reached for a towel, gently working it through her fur, drying what he could without disturbing her too much, each motion careful, deliberate, the way you handled something that could slip away if you moved too fast. She did not resist. She watched, always watching. Her eyes followed his hands, his movements, his face, tracking him not with the dull confusion of an animal in distress, but with awareness, with presence. And when he shifted slightly out of her line of sight, her head moved just enough to keep him there, as if losing him was not an option she was willing to accept. "All right," he murmured, more to steady himself in her, and his gaze dropped again to the collar. Up close, the ridge he had felt earlier was unmistakable now, a seam hidden along the inner lining, subtle, nearly invisible unless you knew what you were looking for, and Ethan didn't know, or at least part of him did, the part that had been trained to notice what others missed, to question what did not fit. His fingers hovered over it for a moment before pressing lightly along the edge, testing, confirming, and there was a slight give beneath the leather, something concealed, something placed there on purpose. His jaw tightened. "What are you carrying, huh?" he asked softly, but the question was not casual. It carried weight, memory, the echo of missions where nothing was ever just what it seemed. The fire popped behind him, sending a brief shower of sparks upward, and in that moment, the dog reacted again, her ears twitching sharply, her gaze snapping not to the flames, but to the window, to the darkness beyond the glass where the storm still raged, as if something out there had called to her without a sound. Ethan followed her attention instinctively, eyes narrowing at the black outline of trees swaying under the wind, seeing nothing, hearing nothing beyond the storm, yet feeling that same quiet pressure return, that sense of being just one step behind something already in motion. He looked back at her, and for the first time since he had found her, she let out a sound, not a whine, not a bark, but a low, controlled breath, almost like a signal held back rather than released, and it settled into the room with a meaning he could not yet translate. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of it all pressing in, the storm, the dog, the collar, the memories he had tried to outrun, now standing in front of him in a form he could not ignore, and as he sat there beside her, the firelight flickering across both of them, one thing became clear in a way that did not need explanation. This was not random. This was not chance, and whatever truth was hidden in that collar, it had already begun to change the direction of everything. The fire settled into a steady burn, casting a low, amber glow across the cabin as the storm continued its restless assault outside. But inside, something had shifted, something quieter, heavier, like the air itself was waiting. Ethan sat back on his heels beside her, his hands resting loosely on his thighs, eyes fixed on the collar as if it might reveal its secrets without being touched again. But it did not. It simply remained there, still deliberate, holding whatever it carried with the same quiet resistance as the dog beneath it. He reached out slowly, fingers brushing the edge once more, this time more certain, more intentional, pressing along the seam until he found the exact point where the leather gauge is slightly under pressure. "All right," he whispered, not to her, not even to himself, but to the moment, as if asking permission from something unseen, and then he slid his thumb beneath the edge and pulled. The seam opened with a faint resistance, subtle, almost reluctant, revealing a narrow compartment hidden within the thickness of the collar, no wider than a finger, sealed tight against time and weather, and inside, tucked carefully as if it mattered, was something small and metallic, wrapped in a thin strip of worn fabric. Ethan paused, his hand hovering for a second before lifting it free, the object catching the firelight as he unwrapped it slowly, revealing a dog tag, dulled by time, but still legible, the engraved letters etched deep enough to survive years of silence. His breath caught, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough to change the rhythm of the room. He read the name once, then again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change if he gave it another second. It did not. The name stayed the same. A name he knew. A name he had not spoken in 3 years. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the cabin seemed smaller, the fire dimmer, the storm louder, all pressing inward at once. "No," he said under his breath, not in denial, but in disbelief, because some things were not supposed to come back like this, not through snow, not through chance. He turned the tag slightly, catching the rest of the engraving, the unit designation, the numbers, the details that left no room for mistake, and with each line, the past he had tried to bury pushed closer to the surface, clearer, sharper, impossible to ignore. Behind him, the dog shifted. It was not sudden, not urgent, but deliberate. Ethan glanced back, and this time her head was lifted higher, her eyes fixed not on his face, but on the tag in his hand, tracking it with a focus that made his chest tighten again, because that look was not curiosity, it was recognition. "You know this," he said quietly, the words barely more than breath, and the dog held his gaze, unblinking, steady, as if confirming what he already understood but had not yet accepted. The fire cracked softly, a single log settling deeper into the flames, and the sound broke the stillness just enough for Ethan to move again, his hand turning the tag once more before lowering it slowly, his thoughts racing now, connecting pieces that should not connect, forming a path he did not want to follow but could not ignore. He looked at the collar, then back at the dog, then down at the tag again, and the realization came not as a shock, but as a quiet, undeniable weight settling into place. This was not lost. This was not forgotten. This had been carried. Through the storm. Through whatever had come before it. Carried here. To him. And as that truth settled in, the dog let out a slow, controlled breath, her body relaxing just slightly against the blanket, as if something important had finally reached its destination, while outside, the storm continued to rage, unaware that inside that small cabin, something far more significant had just begun. The name did not fade when he looked away. It stayed, etched somewhere deeper than memory, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to return, and Ethan felt it settle into his chest with a weight that made it harder to breathe, not because it was new, but because it was not supposed to be unfinished. He leaned back slowly, the dog tag still resting in his palm, his thumb brushing over the worn metal as if the motion could smooth out the past it carried. But it did not. It only made the details sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. "You were there," he said quietly, his voice no longer steady, no longer controlled, but stripped down to something more honest, something closer to the truth he had avoided for years. And the dog watched him, her eyes steady, present, as if she understood more than he was saying. The fire shifted behind him, a low crackle filling the silence. And for a moment, Ethan closed his eyes just for a second, but that was enough for the images to return, not loud, not chaotic, but quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before everything changes, a place, a mission, a decision that had divided time into before and after, and in that space there had been someone standing beside him, someone whose name now rested in his hand. "I thought." He stopped, the words catching, not because he did not know what to say, but because saying it made it real in a way he could not take back. "I thought you did not make it." The dog shifted again, pushing herself slightly higher against the blanket, her strength returning in small, controlled increments, and this time, when she moved, she did not look at the door or the window. She looked at him directly, unwavering, as if correcting something without needing words. Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, the tension in them not gone, but changed, redirected. "No," he said again, softer now, less denial, more understanding. "That is not it." He looked down at the tag once more, then back at the collar, at the hidden compartment now open, empty except for what he held, and the realization deepened layer by layer, not sudden, not overwhelming, but certain. This had been placed there on purpose. Not lost, not forgotten, carried, protected, delivered. His gaze returned to the dog, to the way she held herself despite everything, the control in her movements, the awareness in her eyes, and something inside him shifted, something he had kept locked down for a long time, not breaking but opening just enough to let something through. "You stayed," he said quietly, the words landing heavier than anything he had said before, and the dog's ears flicked slightly, a small movement, but enough to answer in the only way she could. The storm outside pressed harder against the cabin, wind rattling the windows, snow striking the walls in uneven bursts, but inside, the space felt steadier now, grounded by something neither of them fully understood yet. Ethan reached forward again, this time not for the collar, not for the tag, but for her, his hand, resting gently against the side of her neck, feeling the warmth there, the life, the presence that had made it through whatever had come before this moment. "I did not," he added under his breath, the admission quiet, almost lost beneath the sound of the fire, but real in a way it had never been before. The dog did not pull away. She did not move at all. She simply stayed, her breathing steady, her gaze calm, and in that stillness something passed between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but something close, something that allowed the silence to exist without breaking them apart. And as Ethan sat there, the tag in one hand and the dog beneath the other, he understood one thing with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Whatever this was, whatever truth had been carried through the storm and placed in his hands, it was not just about the past. It was asking something of him now. The fire burned lower now, settling into glowing embers that pulsed softly beneath the logs, casting long shadows across the cabin walls while the storm outside began to lose its edge. The wind no longer screaming, but whispering through the trees like something retreating, and in that quieter space, Ethan felt the weight inside him shift again, not lighter, not gone, but clearer, like a path emerging where there had only been noise before. He sat there for a long moment without moving, the dog tag resting in his palm, his other hand still against her neck, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, stronger now, more certain, and with each breath she took, something inside him steadied in return. "You brought this to me," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent, not a question, not even a realization anymore, but an acceptance of what was already true. The dog blinked slowly, her gaze never leaving his, and then, with effort but without hesitation, she shifted her weight and pushed herself up on her front legs, unsteady at first, her muscles trembling under the strain, but determined, controlled, refusing to fall back. Ethan leaned forward instinctively, one hand hovering near her shoulder, ready to catch her if she slipped, but she did not collapse. She held, and then she turned her head toward the door. Not toward the fire, not toward him, toward the door. Ethan followed, her gaze, his brow tightening slightly, that same quiet pull returning, stronger now, more defined, and he exhaled slowly, the answer forming before he could stop it. "You are not done," he murmured. The dog took a small step forward, her paw pressing into the rug, testing the ground, and then another, each movement careful but intentional, her body still weak but guided by something deeper than strength alone. She paused near the edge of the rug and looked back at him, not waiting, not pleading, simply checking, as if to confirm he understood what came next. Ethan stared at her for a second, the room silent except for the faint crackle of the dying fire, and then he let out a breath that felt like it had been held for years. "Of course," he said quietly, almost a tired kind of understanding settling into his voice, because this was how it worked, this was how it always worked. The moment you thought you had reached the end, something pulled you forward again. He rose slowly, his joints stiff from the cold and the weight of the night, and moved to the small wooden table by the wall, where an old map lay folded beneath a stack of papers, untouched for longer than he wanted to admit. He set the dog tag down beside it, staring at it for a moment before unfolding the map with steady hands, his eyes scanning the terrain, the roads, the ridges, until his memory aligned with what he saw, until the place he had tried to forget found its way back onto the page. The dog moved closer, her steps quiet now, more stable, her head lowering slightly as she looked at the map, and then, slowly, deliberately, she placed her paw against a point near the edge of a marked ridgeline. Ethan froze. His gaze dropped to where her paw rested, then back to the tag, then to her again, and the connection settled into place with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "That is where it happened," he said under his breath, the words carrying more than location, more than memory, carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The dog did not move her paw. She held it there, steady, certain, and in that simple gesture, there was no hesitation, no confusion, only direction. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, the hesitation that had followed him for years finally giving way to something else, something quieter but stronger. "All right," he said, reaching for his coat again, the motion deliberate, resolved. "We go back." The storm outside had begun to fade, the wind easing into a low hum, as if the mountain itself was making space. And, as Ethan turned toward the door, the dog stepped beside him, no longer something he had found, but something that had chosen to stand with him, guiding him not just toward a place on a map, but toward something unfinished that was finally ready to be faced. The night had softened by the time they stepped outside, the storm no longer a force that pushed them back, but something that lingered, drifting snow falling in quiet spirals under a sky that was beginning to clear, and the cold, though still sharp, no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a witness. Ethan moved first, boots pressing into fresh powder that reached nearly to his ankles, each step deliberate as he circled the truck and opened the passenger door, glancing back only once to make sure she was still there, still choosing to follow. And she was moving slower than before but steadier, her paws finding their place in the snow with a rhythm that spoke of instinct returning, purpose anchoring each movement. "Easy," he said quietly, though the word carried less urgency now, more respect, because she was no longer just surviving, she was leading. He helped her into the truck, lifting her carefully onto the seat, and this time she adjusted on her own, settling with her head angled toward the windshield, watching the dark road ahead as if she already knew it, as if she had traveled it in a different time, under different conditions, carrying the same purpose she carried now. Ethan closed the door and moved around to the driver's side, climbing in and pausing for a moment before starting the engine, his hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed forward, the map folded beside him, the dog tag placed carefully on the dashboard where he could see it, where it could not be ignored. "We go together," he said under his breath, not looking at her, not needing to, because the agreement had already been made. Without words, the engine turned over, the headlights cut through the thinning snowfall, and the truck eased forward, tires crunching over the frozen ground as they left the cabin behind, leaving the small circle of firelight and stepping fully into whatever waited beyond. The road was harder to see now, partially buried, edges blurred into the surrounding landscape. But Ethan did not hesitate, his focus sharper than it had been in years, guided not just by memory, but by something present, something beside him that shifted slightly every time he adjusted direction, her body responding in subtle ways, leaning forward when they were aligned, tensing when they were not. A quiet system of signals that required no explanation. Miles passed slowly, the distance stretching in a way that made time feel uncertain. The world reduced to the beam of headlights and the narrow path ahead. And then, gradually, the terrain began to change, the trees thinning, the ground rising into a ridge line that Ethan recognized before he allowed himself to admit it. His grip on the wheel tightened. "This is it," he said, the words steady but heavier now, anchored in something real, something he could no longer outrun. The dog shifted beside him, her ears lifting, her gaze fixed ahead, her body alert in a way it had not been before. And when he slowed the truck near the base of a ridge, she did not wait for him to open the door. She was already moving, already preparing, as if this final stretch was hers to take. Ethan stepped out into the cold once more. The air quieter here, the wind reduced to a low hum that moved through the trees like a distant echo, and he watched as she climbed down from the truck and stepped forward into the untouched snow, her movements no longer hesitant, no longer weak, but purposeful, guided by something he could not see. "Show me," he said softly, the request simple, but filled with everything that had led them here. And she moved ahead, leaving a clear line of tracks for him to follow, each step taking them deeper into a place that had been waiting, not forgotten, not gone, just buried beneath time and silence. And, as Ethan followed behind her, the distance between who he had been and who he was now began to close, step by step, breath by breath, until the past was no longer something behind him, but something he was finally walking toward. The ridge rose quiet and still beneath the fading night, the snow untouched except for the line they had carved into it, a single path forward that felt less like movement and more like return, and Ethan followed a few steps behind her, his breath steady, his mind no longer racing, because whatever waited ahead was no longer something to fear, it was something to face. She slowed near the crest, her body lowering slightly as if the ground itself held meaning, and then she stopped, standing still in a way that was not hesitation but arrival. Ethan closed the distance, his boots sinking deeper as the incline leveled out, and when he reached her side, he did not speak right away. He simply looked, taking in the space around them, the open stretch of snow, the broken line of trees beyond, the faint outline of old tracks long buried beneath seasons of weather, and something inside him recognized it before his mind fully caught up. "Yeah," he said quietly, almost to the wind, almost to himself, but mostly to the past that had finally caught up with him. The dog stepped forward once more, just a few feet, then began to paw gently at the snow, not frantic, not searching, but precise, as if she already knew what lay beneath, and Ethan watched her for a moment before kneeling down beside her. brushing snow away with his gloved hands, each motion steady, deliberate, until the white gave way to something darker beneath. The faint outline of disturbed earth that time had tried to smooth over, but never fully erased. His chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but with a weight that felt earned, that felt necessary. I remember he said, the word simple, but complete, because this was the place not just in distance, but in meaning, the place where everything had changed, where something had been left behind, not out of choice, but out of circumstances he had carried ever since. The dog stopped digging and stepped back slightly, giving him space, her eyes fixed on him now, not the ground, not the past, but him, as if the next part belonged to him alone. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tag, the metal cold even, through his glove, and for a moment he just held it there, looking at it one last time before lowering it into the shallow space they had uncovered, placing it carefully, not as something lost, but as something returned. You made it back, he said softly, his voice steady now, grounded in something that no longer needed to be explained, and the wind moved gently across the ridge, carrying the words into the quiet morning that was beginning to form around them. He covered the tag with snow, smoothing it over with his hand, not hiding it, but honoring it, leaving it where it belonged. And when he finished, he sat back slightly, exhaling a breath that felt different from all the others that had come before it, lighter, not because the past had changed, but because he had finally met it where it stood. The dog stepped forward again and lowered herself beside him, her body resting against his leg, her presence steady, warm, real, and he reached down without thinking, his hand finding her neck, fingers resting against the collar that had carried everything here. You did not let go, he said quietly, and this time there was no doubt in his voice, no question left unanswered. The sky above them had begun to shift, the first light of morning breaking through the clouds, soft and pale, spreading across the ridge and touching everything with a quiet kind of grace. And in that light, the storm felt distant, the weight felt different, and the silence between them felt complete. Ethan looked out over the landscape, then back down at the place they had marked, and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was carrying something unfinished. He simply stayed there, beside her, in the stillness where nothing needed to be said, and everything that mattered had already been understood. In this deeply emotional cinematic journey, a U.S. Marine finds himself drawn into a powerful chain of events when he rescues a freezing German Shepherd during a relentless winter storm, only to uncover a hidden truth that leads him back to a place he tried to forget. This gripping narrative blends survival, loyalty, and redemption into one of the most unforgettable animal stories, where every moment carries weight and meaning beyond words, as the bond between the U.S. Marine and the German Shepherd grows stronger. Subtle clues reveal that this encounter was never random, transforming the rescue into a mission of closure and quiet grace that defines the essence of the most powerful animal stories. Through haunting landscapes, controlled pacing, and deeply human emotion, this story captures the soul of animal stories by showing how loyalty can transcend time, memory, and distance. The German Shepherd is not just a companion, but a silent guide, leading the U.S. Marine toward a truth, buried beneath snow and regret, reminding viewers why animal stories continue to resonate across generations. As the journey unfolds, the story delivers a rare combination of mystery, faith, and emotional healing, standing out among animal stories for its cinematic depth, spiritual undertone, and the unbreakable connection between a soldier and his K-9 partner. This is not just another rescue tale, but a layered experience where every step forward reveals something deeper, making it one of the most compelling animal stories ever told. Character 1. A 35-year-old Caucasian U.S. Marine male, rugged face, short brown military haircut, light stubble, wearing a worn winter tactical jacket, dog tags visible, front-facing portrait, intense calm expression, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2. A 4-year-old German Shepherd female, sable coat with black saddle and tan fur, strong athletic build, amber eyes, wearing a rugged military K-9 collar, full body visible, standing. Alert, front-facing view, realistic lighting, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.